And where's the share source sheet? All right, we've got a double parsha this week of Matot Masei, and as hard as it might be to believe, we are going to hopefully complete Sefer Bamidbar. So we are moving right along.
Wonderful. So,
Chazak, chazak, benit chazek. Um,
yes, especially meaningfulness during the three
yeah,
weeks.
yeah. So we I think we've pointed out this parsha, these parsha are always read at this time of the year, right? Say Parshat Devarim always precedes Tisha B'av, or almost always precedes Tisha B'av. So Matot or Matot Masei will almost always fall within the 3 weeks. Um, so there's that connection. It's an interesting, it opens, I think last year or 2 years ago, we spoke about the opening of the Parsha, which is all about Nidarim, about vows. Hi, Beatrice.
Hello.
Um,
Hi, Beatrice.
and we have the other big narrative piece is the petition of God and Reuven to remain on I always get the geography confused, on the eastern side of the Jordan River,
Communist
because
side.
on the other side, they don't want to cross over into what we'll call Eretz Yisrael proper, because they want to stay there because it's good pasture land for their cattle. So we have their request and Moshe's harsh response back to them, but ultimate giving into them, adding the Chatzi Shevet Menashe, half of Menashe is going to stay with them. I think we spoke about that, whichever year we didn't speak about Nidarim. Um, so that's another often spoken about. And then the second parsha, Masei, um, gives us the detailed list of all the places where Bnei Israel stopped in their journey through the desert. So there's a lot that's said there about the value of the journey, and each step is valuable and things along that nature. It's an interesting conclusion to the book of Bamidbar. We're going to focus on a different part of the parsha from the first one from Matot, and that is the war against Midian. So this is an often glossed over chapter in um, in the study of the parsha. In general, it's often glossed over. There's some interesting things that emerge though from it. So it's really the entirety of chapter 31 deals with, right? We're told, and this is sort of stretched out over three parshiot, because we told to seek vengeance, nikom nikmat b'nei Israel meta midyanim, seek out the vengeance of b'nei Israel, avenge them from the Midianites. Um, right? So Moshe is told this, Achar te'asef elamecha, and then you will die. Right? So we spoke last week about how Moshe is told the end is coming. He has to appoint Yoshua as his successor. But this is really the end. This is the end of the road for Moshe. So he's given one last mission, and that is to go fight and avenge Bnei Israel against Midian. Avenge them. They have to seek revenge for the incident of Baal Peor. It's a little bit tricky because we have in various places description of Moab and Midian, and the two seem to be conflated in one way or the other. But right, everyone understands that we're supposed to seek revenge for what happened with the Benot Moab, with the Moabite women in Baal Peor at the very end of Parshat Bilam, in the continuation into Parshat Pinchas, where the Moabite women came and seduced the Jewish men. Right? Did they? There was seemingly some element of avodah zarah, of idolatry, not just sexual promiscuity and impropriety, but there was something religious in what they did as well. So we have to seek revenge. And so it gives rise to interesting questions about, is nikama, is revenge appropriate? When is revenge appropriate? So that's one really big question that this chapter raises. Um, so Moshe tells them, החלצו מכם איתכם אנשים לצבא, ויהיו על מדיין לתת נקמת Hashem b'Midian. So select men to go fight in the army, and they will seek God's revenge against Midian. Elef lemate lachol matot Yisrael. Each tribe should send 1,000 warriors. So they all go out. And now we pick up in verse 7. Vayitzvu Midian kasher tziva Hashem et Moshe vayargu kol zachar. So they waged battle against Midian as God commanded Moshe. And they killed all the men. Midian hargu al and they killed the kings of Midian. And they killed Bilam, right? Bilam was the prophet. Vayishbu b'nei Yisrael neshem Midian. Do I have to scroll down? And they took as captives the Midianite women, Vet Tapam, and the children, Vekol Behamtam, Vekol Miknehem, Vekol Chelam Bazazu. They took the women and the children and the animals, and they took all the spoils of war. Vekol Arehem B'Meshvotam, Vekol Tirotam, Sarfu Ba'esh. They burnt down all of their cities. Vaikchu Ekol HaShalal, Vetkol HaMalkoach, V'Adam U'Reima. They took the spoils of war. Vayaviu El Moshe ve'el Elazar HaKohen ve'el Adat b'nei Yisrael tashviv et hamalkoach ve'et hashalal. So they take all the captives and the spoils to Moshe and Elazar and the leaders. Vayitzu Moshe ve'Elazar HaKohen v'chol nisi ha'ida likratam el michutz l'machaneh. So Moshe and Elazar and the leaders go out to greet them. Vaiktsof Moshe al pikudei achayil, sarei alafim v'sarei amayot ba'im mitzvah milchama. Moshe gets angry at the officers who had returned from battle. Vayomer aleichem Moshe chayitem kol nekeva. Moshe says, "What did you do? You let all the women, all the females live." Hinhena you livnei Yisrael bidvar bilam limsar mal b'Hashem al devar peor b'tiyam magifa ba'dat Hashem. These women that you let live are the whole reason we had to seek revenge against them. They're the ones that caused the Jews to sin. So therefore, kill all males and every woman who is of sexual maturity age, we'll call it. But all the virgin females you can let live. Okay, so this is another of this often overlooked chapter, right? This is one of the verses that's not so overlooked, is discussion about Moshe's getting very angry and insisting, right? So right when we talk about the ethics of war, right, in the same vein that we talk about war against Amalek, war against the 7 nations of Canaan, right? Is this just ethic and moral that we're told? And Moshe gets very angry that they didn't kill, basically all of Midian. Okay, then if we skip down, right, so verses 21 through, we'll call it 28, it gives us, and there's even more detail that I skipped over in the interest of saving space, but it gives us detail about all the booty, the spoils of war that was collected, and how it was divided up and who got parts of it. Really interesting stuff to see there. And then at the very end of the chapter, picking up in verse 48, Vayikrevu el Moshe pekudim asher la'alfei hatzavas ve'elafim v'asarei mayot. So the officers come to Moshe at the end of this episode of war. Vayomru el Moshe avadecha nasu et rosh anshe hamilchama asher be'adenu v'lo nifkad mimenu ish. And they say, Moshe, we took a census of everyone who went out to battle. Not a single soldier was lost. V'nakrev korban Hashem ish asher matzah klei zahav ve'etzadav ve'tzamid tabat agil. So we're going to offer a sacrifice of todah, of thanksgiving to God, that everyone survived. No, there were no casualties of war on the Jewish side. All right, so this is a very loaded chapter here. There's a lot going on. We're told to seek revenge. We're told to go right where when they wage a successful battle, but don't kill all the um, basically all of Midian, right? At the end of the day, it's only the female children virgins. Unclear exactly what age we're talking about, but a very small segment of the Midianite population is ultimately allowed to survive. And so we have this whole question about the ethics of war and who should be killed, who shouldn't be killed, what's proper, in discussions of revenge, right? How do you measure what's appropriate, right? All sorts of things that are very relevant and very discussed today in the ongoing war with Hamas. Um, the disproportionality and all these concepts really are at least surfaced here. So I wanted to look at this from two different perspectives. The first is kind of within the context of the Torah, just unpacking a little bit about the significance of this specific battle, this specific war, and why the Torah gives us so many details about it. Generally, when the Torah tells us about the battles that were waged, we don't get so many details. Right? So this is summed up nicely. My teacher, Rabbi Natty Helfgott, um, has a series of essays on Sefer Bamidbar that he turned into a book. It's available on the Yeshivat Har Etzion, the virtual Beit Midrash. So he notes in source number 2, I'm picking up from over right here. Upon closer examination, we notice that not only does the Torah describe the preparations for war and the actual war in great detail, but devotes close to 30 psukim to the detailed division of the booty, cattle, gold, etc., among the different sections of the people, as well as the tax on this booty, which was given to the Kohanim and the Leviim. This detailed presentation stands in stark contrast to what we find in almost all other battles that are described in the Torah. In no other war, whether those of the first generation, Yotzei Mitzrayim, who left Egypt, or those of the second generation, Ba'ei Ha'aretz, the ones who entered into the land, does the Torah go into anything more than a cursory description of the booty and its division. To paraphrase the Malbim's terse comment to the detailed account of the protracted negotiations between Avraham and Ephron regarding Me'at Machpelah, what contribution does such a story make to the mission and message of Torah? Why? Why do we have all these details? What is going on?
Is the question specifically value focused? Like the question that's being asked at the end there is seems to imply that there's something that we should learn from it,
Right.
as
So
opposed to it
he's
being a
not
part of a plot.
right. So he's not looking at it from the perspective of kind of universal military ethics. We'll come there in the second half.
Okay.
But I mean that might be part of the answer, right? That the Torah chose here as kind of Moshe's last battle or the last battle before we enter and begin the conquest of the land to teach us some important rules about how we should engage in future battles. And that's an interesting question we'll come to. So he, of course, right, maybe this is obvious, maybe not, but he says that, right, to understand this, we have to really go back to the end of Parshat Bilam, the beginning of Parshat Pinchas, where we first encounter the Midianim or the Benot Moav. Again, the Torah conflates them, or there's two separate, but it's really the same thing, right? And we're told, right? We're told, we read it in last week's Parsha, begin the first aliyah in Parshat Pinchas, Sarvora to Midianim v'kitem otam. Assail the Midianites and defeat them, right? We were already given an order to go to battle against Midian, and yet for some reason that battle was delayed, at least in presentation, until one parsha later. Kitzorimhem lachem nichlahem asher niklu lachem al devar pa'or, v'al devar kozbi bat nasi Midian achutam hamukal b'yom hamagefa al devar pa'or. For they assailed you by trickery. They practiced against you because of the affair of Peor and because of the affair of the kinswoman of Cosby. daughter of the Midianite chieftain who was killed at the time of the plague on account of Peor. Okay, so we have to go back. And Rav Nadi gives, and this is a method that we've seen many times before, that to understand um, the battle against Moab, we have to see it in light of a previous failure of Bnei Israel. And that, of course, right, the failure of the generation of the deserts, or I guess there's many failures, but perhaps the failure is the Chet Egel. So he notes at least 7 or 8 parallels, both linguistically and thematically, between what we encounter with the description of the sin with the daughters of Moab and what happens in the Chet Egel, the sin of the golden calf. Okay, so number 1. Vatikrena la'am lizivchei Eloheihen, vayochal la'am v'ishtachavu le'Eloheihen. Right, so what did the daughters of Midian do? Is they called the nation to bring sacrifices to their God, to the God of Midian, to the God of Moab. And they ate and they drank to the god, to the idols, to the god, to the idolatrous gods. In Chet Egel, we find Vayashkimu mimacharat, right? After they build the calf, and in the most generous reading of it, Aaron tries to delay them as much as possible from doing whatever they're going to do. But the next morning, after right, it's been formed, Vayashkimu lemacharat, vayalu olot, vayigishu shlamim, vayeshev ha'am le'echol v'shato vayakumu litzachek. They woke up in the morning and they brought sacrifices and they sat down to eat and drink, and they rose up litzachek, to dance. We'll come back to what litzachek is, but again, the idolatrous worship of this golden calf is preceded or includes the act of eating and drinking. It's not just coming to shul, but it's staying for the kiddush as well. Maybe the kiddush comes before davening here, unclear. But we have idolatry with eating. Okay. The second parallel he notes, Vayeshev Yisrael b'shitim vayachel ha'am liznot et benot Moav. So the whole incident is based on the fact that they were staying in Shittim, and then they start to act inappropriately with the daughters of Moab. There's some social interaction. Is how it's understood. Is that right? Living in Shittim, sitting, going, whatever interactions they had, led to mixed dancing, led to whatever else it led to the sins. In the aftermath of the Chet Egel, as Hashem is telling what's going to happen or warning what might happen in the future, it says, right, that God is very concerned lest they make a covenant with the inhabitants of the lands to where they're going, and they'll start to worship their gods. Okay, so again, there's a concern of social interaction leading to idolatrous.
If the idolaters in the land decide that they don't want to become Jews, but they recognize the power, the glory, the status of Ribono Shel Olam and his Beit HaMikdash and so on, and they want to bring korbanot, are they allowed to donate and bring them?
So non-Jews are definitely allowed to bring korbanot. It's a question about the inhabitants of the land, a huge machloket, which is kind of questions raised in the second part of the shiur about ethics of war, about right, was the imperative to wipe out all the 7 nations of the land only for those who remained committed and entrenched in idolatry, or were they given an opportunity to do tshuva? So that's an interesting question. So specifically about the 7 nations, if they decide they don't want to be involved in idolatry, so there is significant opinions that say yes, they could, without becoming Jewish, could reject the idolatry, recognize Hashem, and even participate in worship of Hashem. Without Judaism never made the claim that everyone has to become Jewish like us.
But they'll socialize and
Right.
that
So
could lead to mixed
that's part of the
dancing with.
machlokas about whether they were given the opportunity of tshuva or not.
But it raises a big question
Yeah.
with this whole issue of how do you deal with people who are living in the land
Hmm.
with the permission of the Jewish people, the Jewish government,
Yeah.
but there are those who don't want such people around
Correct.
and are prepared to kill some of them to give a hint to where that they want these other people to get out. That's a major uh, challenge on a particular level, a particular way. Uh, it's odd stuff, and were the people in fact educated, the Jewish people educated as to how to live in the world and at the same time remain morally, ethically separate.
Yeah. So that's really important questions that are certainly playing themselves out ad hayom hazeh. Um, and you know, certainly both sides of that argument point to sources in the Torah to support their position. Some even point to verses in this parsha. Um, so it's a really big, important question. It seems to me clear that the Torah never expected that um, we would be living in a land totally devoid of people that are not Jewish. It seems that that was never an expectation, and certainly it was never an expectation that we would not have interaction. How much interaction is, there's a lot there's a lot to be said about it. There's a lot of debate both back and forth. Um, so I think we can it's a big issue. It's an important issue. It's not necessarily our issue for tonight. So we will recognize it and table that. But important stuff. Thank you. Um, so the next back to our comparison, the next parallel. I didn't bring anything from Benot Moab because it's just so obvious. But that verse we saw before in the Cheta Ego where it says Vayakumu litzachek, that they got up litzachek, right? We translate normally litzachek is to joke around, to laugh. Here it's translated as to dance. But Rashi translates it litzachek. Yesh b'mashma hazeh gilui arayot. Litzachek, he says, implies sexual impropriety. And so there is an element of sexual impropriety in the Cheta Egel as well. Clearly, that is the dominant theme of the sin with Benot Moab. Okay, the next parallel he notes is in the aftermath of the sin in our incident with Benot Moab, Vayitzamed Israel lebal Peor. They attached themselves. Whatever they did with Baal Peor. Vayichar af Hashem Israel. God grew very angry in this specific term. Vayichar af Hashem. Literally, his nostrils flared. And then in Parshat Pinchas, we know that God says Pinchas is going to get this special reward because he saved Bnei Israel. Because of what Pinchas did, I did not destroy Bnei Israel. So right there was a threat, at least, that they would be totally destroyed, totally wiped out. And in the Cheta Egel, we also find God says to Moshe, "Atahanicha li vichar api bahem." Let me alone. Let my anger go wild against them. Va'achalim, I will destroy them. Va'aseh otcha l'goy gadol, I'll make you a great nation. So the same, right? Not only that God is obviously angry at the sin, but his anger is expressed through the phrase of vayichar af and a threat of destruction. In both stories, we have once the punishment is meted out and justice is restored or attempted to be restored, it's Jew versus Jew, right? That the justice and there is killing there, right? We could call it even civil war, but in the aftermath of Benot Moab, Vayomer Moshe el Shoftei Yisrael, Hirgu Isha Nashav Nitzmadim Labal Peor. Moshe says to the judges, the leaders, the officials, kill those people who were attached to Baal Peor, who were attached to the sin, to the idolatry. And in Sefer Shmot, after the Chet HaEgel, Vayomer lahem Kormar Hashem Elokei Yisrael, Simu ish charbo l'reicho, Ivru, Vishuvu mishar lashar, B'machanev Yirgu ish et achiv. So this is to Shevet Levi. Tribe of Levi is told, go and kill everyone who participated in the sin of the golden calf. Right, and then another parallel, as he says in both stories, the charge is led by major figures of the house of Levi. Moshe, all of Levi, who goes and kills the sinners, and of course Pinchas. And in both stories, there's not only the direct killing, but there's also a magefa, some sort of plague that afflicts the nation in the aftermath. Okay, so
Right. Rabbi, just to clarify,
yeah.
is Pinchas the only one who actually kills somebody? I'm trying to remember the text.
No, right, meaning after Pinchas does what he does, right, then Moshe says, right, the
Torah says
over
that the
here.
plague ends.
Vayomer Moshe el Shoftei Yisrael Yirgu ish asher nitzvadim lebalpor. Moshe tells the judges to go kill everyone else that participated.
So is that happening simultaneous with Pinchas?
That's probably after Pinchas, meaning Pinchas was a moment that everyone saw, and then after Pinchas, we have to take care. We have to clean up. He sort of stopped the plague, but then they had to do the cleanup and restore justice.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. So Rabbi Helfgott then goes again, he gives a similar unpacking of all the details of the distribution of the spoils of war. And right, they took the spoils, the warriors got some, the rest of the nation got some. There was a tax given to the Shevet Levi, to the Kohanim and the Leviim. Very detailed about how all the spoils of war from Midian got divided up. And so he says, we don't need to get into all the details of it, but that the only other place where we see such a detailed accounting of division of gold and silver and distribution and then further taxing is when it comes to the gold and silver and other materials that were collected for the Mishkan. Right, so we know that the nation gave, and right, so you can read this whole thing on your own. Or look at his shir. Okay, so we have and again the commandment for the Mishkan is a big machlokus about chronologically when it happened, but as it's presented in the Torah, the commandment for the Mishkan comes immediately after the Chet HaEgel. So again, both stories have this really detailed division of gold and silver and other riches. The only other place in the Torah where we have anything parallel such a detailed accounting of cattle and human beings and gold is our chapter here in Matot. This parallel serves to reinforce the tight connection of the Chet HaEgel theme that the Torah wants to convey. In short, if the confrontation with Midian was in effect the Chet HaEgel of the second generation, then the aftermath of that war, division of booty and setting aside the tax and giving of the korban by the leadership to the Mishkan, is the Melechet HaMishkan experience of that generation. A quick look at the outline of our chapter and the language of the Torah chooses to use clearly indicates the attempt to connect us back to the Mishkan passage. Okay, so whatever is happening here, and he says, I don't know why the Torah is doing this. Like, right, there could be a lot of messages that one takes. I'll pause. Anyone have any thoughts on what the message might be? Why does the second generation, right, the generation that's about to enter the land of Israel, that's at the end of 40 years of gathering, they're giving this detailed instruction to go to war against Midian, and in the way that war is fought, in the circumstances leading up to the war and the aftermath of the war, they're supposed to be transported back to the Chet HaEgel and the Mishkan. Why? Any thoughts?
There's one stark difference that maybe could offer some insight on that. In this war, the Levies have to fight. It's the only one where they do.
Okay.
Isn't it just Pinchas?
It's Pinchas, it's Moshe, sure, but they took 1,000 from the tribe of Levi.
No, they took
I
from
don't
each
think,
tribe and they have 12,000. That's
Yes, they
Ephraim
did.
and Manasseh.
right, I think it's Ephraim and
No, no, no.
Manasseh. I don't
No,
think,
in this case, they took them from the tribe of Levi. It's in the Rashi.
okay,
It's mentioned
Oh,
that
wow.
the Levies fought in this war.
okay,
Wow.
That's one big difference. And the other one is that when it comes to the Chet HaEgel, we have what we call the heir of Rav.
mm-hmm,
And there, even in the elaboration of all of uh, the mode of judging and handing out punishments later on, there's a specific role for them if they were informed that they shouldn't do it, and all those. I mean, it's they're very much a part of the whole process, and here they are not. So there is harks back in a way to the whole problem with Bala or the problems there, because some would say that this new generation thought that they were going to get things right, you know, and they also knew that the hardest struggles are the ones where one descends into materiality in its various forms, be it hedonism, be it sexual behavior, sensuality. I mean, there are all kinds of things that are going on here that went wrong. But they thought they could handle it. They knew that their job was to bring Hashem's presence everywhere, and things like that. They knew how important it was to bring about an awareness of Kedusha wherever they were, and they were confident that they could do it, that they could do it by themselves. And
hmm,
now they're realizing, no, they can't. And the Levies themselves have to take a stronger role. Those who are
okay,
really to
interesting,
be teaching people about what's to be done, and the necessity to talk about oaths and so on. Are also here as a way of setting up barriers and helpful separation. This is one of them. We have to disassociate ourselves with some people.
yeah,
Unfortunately, they have to be killed. That kind of notion kind of emerges out of that. So I don't know.
okay,
That's just a
beautiful,
thought.
thank you. Any
Um,
other thoughts on the
yeah,
significance here?
I was going to guess Rechush Gadol. Um, Thinking back to the fulfillment of the Brit with Avraham of tremendous wealth. That was like where my mind went first. I don't know how confident I am in that right now, but I was thinking that before that this generation, it's not so clear what their wealth looked like.
Okay,
And so maybe the Torah wants to like make it clear, by the way, like check, check, check in terms of taking you out of Mitzrayim, giving you great wealth and bringing you into the land, because that's something that might not have lasted from the first generation after 40 years of wandering in the Midbar,
interesting, okay,
right? So and then that would explain why, oh, I had that
Hmm.
where you get Reuven, Gad, and Chatzi Menashe, right?
yeah,
That they come afterwards and they go, we have so much, could we just stay
uh,
here?
right,
Is like a way of reinforcing, like, look how much they had.
right,
So counting it off.
okay, interesting,
But this time they had to take the vessels and kosher them. Before, that wasn't so clear.
yeah,
Now it's painfully
uh,
clear.
okay.
Um,
Interesting.
there.
Yeah. So Anne's noting that at the right one of the consequences of the taking of all this booty, all the spoils of war, is that we're given the mitzvah or two mitzvot, right? Number one is this is the source where we learn about koshering, that they had to kosher the whatever pans and kitchen items that they took. And number two is tefillat kalim, is that right? Even if even something that wasn't not kosher, something brand new, but we get from this is the source of the mitzvah of toivel, of taking our new vessels to the mikvah. So and saying that right, maybe that's kind of a corrective or to fix from the first generation where they also took spoils from Egypt and that led to the Cheta Ego. that here we're given a corrective measure to ensure that we use the spoils and the wealth and the riches properly, is we have to give it some sort of purification or sanctification process. Is that a fair summary, Ann?
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, beautiful. Okay, so we have these interesting parallels, and we're gonna kind of leave it at that. Um, but again, right, so really what sparks it is noticing that, yeah, we have a war, but the description of the war here is very, very different from other descriptions of war that goes to painstaking detail. Anytime the Torah does that, there has to be something else going on. This is his suggestion about what might be going on. And again, there's lots of lessons that can be derived. I wanted to touch on, we're not going to really go into great depth in this, but right, this is potentially one of the sources to talk about ethics of war in general. I told you, I've mentioned several times the book by Rabbi Brody, The Ethics of Our Fighters. Excellent, excellent book for anyone who wants to give any thought to this stuff. And again, he worked on this during, it was sent to the printer before October 7th happened, and it came back from the publisher after. So really, unfortunately, a very timely release. And he's had in the second source I have in this box here, he was on a podcast that I've listened to often, and this past Sunday was visiting day, so I had a good 10 hours in the car to listen to lots of stuff. But really, he spoke on the Matan Parsha podcast about this very question. Really, really good stuff. So he, potentially this is one of the major sources where we can derive some ethics, some clues into Jewish ethics of war. But he says it's not so clear. So we'll start with Rav Goren. Rav Goren, who was the first chief rabbi of the army, when he accepted the position of chief rabbi, he says, and this is really one of the fascinating questions in general about the state of Israel, about the Jewish state, is assume, right? It's a question, but let's, is there halachic means by which to operate a Jewish state? So we know that there's ongoing debate in the state of Israel about Haredim participating in the army, not participating in the army, right? So that's connected, but not totally. But the question of, does halacha give us, right, if we wanted to run a halachic state, could we do it? Could the state of Israel exist as a proper halachic state, right? So that raises questions about, well, how do you have an electric utilities when you're assuming everyone is Jewish and keeping Shabbos? Right, so Robert, that goes back to your question, right? So one answer is no. The Torah halacha never assumed that everyone living here is going to be Jewish, right? We'll have non-Jews that operate the electric grid on Shabbos.
They have a problem in Israel in particular, at least until all the disruption recently in the last 2 years, with the construction of subway extensions to provide efficient, safe, secure service throughout the coastal plain and adjacent areas. A big program. In order to do that work, it was argued that certain things had to be done on Shabbat.
Right.
Had to be done because of disruption in emergency services, in people getting to work, back to it, would be so great that people would say, don't do it, and that would cripple the country. And it was arguing back and forth, up and down. Now,
I mean,
if there's an emergency, you can go to a Rav and ask, we're starving. Are we permitted, lefi halacha, when there's no other food available, to eat pork?
Yeah, right. So
Pikuach Nefesh will permit it. Does it extend to the operation of a state? Does the military have the right to force people to carry a gun and do other things on Shabbos. Uh, there was a there was
Yeah,
a
so that's a
remarkable
slightly
yeah
different question, meaning because if it's under the frame of pikuach nefesh, so that's already but meaning that's one approach, right? Is that
yeah
to these big questions about Jewish statehood, um, right? Some justify having the phone company, the phones operating on Shabbos in case there's a medical emergency. You have to call an ambulance. Well, the only way you can call an ambulance is if the phone lines are working, even if that means some people will be calling their cousin in Haifa or whatever. Um, right? Questions about the economy, questions about how you have Shemitah during and function in a global economy, all sorts of fascinating questions. So um, Rav Goren says that as the first chief rabbi of the army of the first Jewish state in millennia, um, he's got a real problem. He's got a real challenge in front of him. So he says, I knew that upon accepting the position as chief rabbi of the army, I would have to create something out of nothing. I would have to write and compile a military Shulchan Aruch without having any traditions from which to compile such a guide. Would have to gather hints from here and there, a grain here, a grain there, from the Bible, from the written law, the oral law, and all sorts of sources, and from the Medrash. Would have to gather one grain to the next and create a whole mass from which we could learn how to conduct ourselves, how to keep the Torah in the army during wartime and during peacetime. Would have to develop solutions for each issue that arose because we had no unbroken tradition of religious lifestyle in a military setting. There would be questions related to the halachot of Shabbos, kashrus, many other types of issues. It would require halachic rulings. This was a tremendous challenge, right? But what Rav Goren worked with the assumption that it's a tremendous challenge, but it can be done. If we turn back to Rav Yisraeli, Rav Shaul Yisraeli, another contemporary of Rav Goren, says it's not possible, right? The Torah was written in the time of the Torah, and there is no way to bring what Torah halacha, the classical sources, to a contemporary state. And so, therefore, the army of the Jewish state should be guided by whatever the international norms are. Rav
I love his
Yisraeli's
reasoning.
answer is quite surprising. The international community allows it. Since the earliest periods of the Bible, the nations of the world have agreed that warfare, despite its violence, is an acceptable manner of dispute resolution. Jewish law does not have an independent teaching regarding the laws of wartime behavior, what philosophers call jus in bello. Instead, it relies on the international norms in the given period. Okay, so that's a fundamental debate, and it's right. They're debating. He's talking about it in terms of the army, but we could right that debate is extended to statehood in general. Right? Is there a unique Jewish way of setting up a government in a contemporary state? Or do we just turn to the experts in political philosophy and whatever the prevailing theory of the day is, that's what we should do? Really interesting question.
I don't know that they're necessarily opposed to each other. I'd like that you brought them to kind of see both sides. But like it seems like Rav Yisraeli is talking about like the rules of war and the ethics of it.
Hmm.
And at least in the part that we like that you've taken from Rav Goren, like the specific examples that he's citing are about being Jewish in a time of
Yeah,
war,
fair enough.
right?
It's a broader debate between them.
Okay, I'll
This was
accept
the
that.
money
I'll
quote that
accept
I
that.
that I found.
Okay.
Um, okay, so within this debate, it's quite interesting to note. And again, we're coming to the end of our time, but there are many halachot that are derived specifically from our passage. Okay, so that's really interesting in this debate. Um, So, right, one of the halachot in source number 7, the Rambam summarizing tells us, "Kishetzarin al ir litopsa," when you lay siege to a city, you want to conquer a city, you lay siege to the city. Ein makifinota me arba ruchoteha ela mishalosh ruchoteha. You can't surround it from all four sides. You have to leave one side open. Umanichin makom labareach ulechol misha yirtze lihimalet al nafsho, so that anyone who wants to escape can escape. shene'emar, vaytzba'u Midian kasher tzivah Hashem et Moshe. As it says in our chapter, that they besieged Midian as God commanded Moshe. And there's an oral tradition that says that this is what God told Moshe. Okay, so we have a strong precedence. Again, debate if does this, and Rav Goren, took this very literally. He was sort of ridiculed when the army in 1982 was in Lebanon and was laying siege to Beirut. He insisted that there has to be an escape route, and so all of the PLO leadership would have escaped. And in fact, I think that's what happened. But so that's one interesting thing. Rav Yoel ben Nun notes what we spoke about, the fact that the Torah emphasized in our passage that they had to take 1,000 warriors from each tribe. So Rav Yoel said the equal conscription of each tribe 1,000 was certainly intended to establish the army of Israel as a national and not a tribal army. This happened precisely at the time that the tribes of Reuven, Gad, and half of Manasseh began their tribal conquest for the purpose of settling their territories. You have to have a national army, right? Not quite as a direct halachic application, but you can see where that would lead. But then we come to the troubling, or the seemingly troubling detail about Moshe getting very angry at them for not killing all of the kids and not killing all the females. So Rav Yoel understands this, and we can agree or not agree with his, even if he's saying the Torah setting precedent, if this is in fact a moral lesson or not. But he says the message here, the Torah's morality of war is directed at preventing future wars of revenge. Most of the Midianite children would have grown up filled with rage and desire for vengeance. Wars would have continued for many generations with countless casualties on all sides. The fact is, after the war against Midian, there was only one more instance of fighting in the Midianites. Okay, he gets into a little bit of history of Tanakh and all the wars against the Canaanites. Okay, so he says that the reason Moshe was so strict is that he was trying to avoid future wars, right? Again, not exact, but questions about, are we supposed to have the complete destruction of Hamas, or are we aiming for something less than that? Right, so we can see the parallels here. We can understand what the message might be, and we can, some of us might see that as a very moral, ethical position to take, and some might say, no, even if we want to avoid future wars, it doesn't mean that that children should be killed in that effort. Right, on the flip side of this, the Chatam Sofer, and I'll just summarize what the Chatam Sofer says, but right, the commandment given was V'ata hirgu kol zachar bataf. Now kill all of the male children, right? So he says, one reason for this is because it would be seen as really immoral if right, we know that the reason they went to war is because of the females. So it should go without saying that the females who participated in the sin should be punished for that. But even if the males didn't participate, it would be really against the norms of the time to kill females and not males. So that's one, right? That's one interesting take on this. But he also says, Ve'ata. Now, in this specific situation, we're going to seek a complete revenge and kill the children and kill the males and the females. But it's only ve'ata. It's only for this situation. There is no precedent to be learned for future wars. Okay, so again, you have both sides, and there's not necessarily a right or a wrong answer to this debate. It's a fascinating debate, right? This is the stuff that doctoral dissertations are written about. There's a lot to say about it, but it is quite fascinating that from this seemingly random, incomprehensible chapter describing the war against Midian, that these huge ideas emerge, these huge issues that continue to be extremely relevant and timely, unfortunately, more relevant and more timely than any of us would have wanted for them to be. that we have this, really one of the major locations of the discussion or possible discussions of Jewish war ethics. And is there a Jewish war ethic? What are those ethics? So we have that here.
Oh, I'm
Questions,
curious.
thoughts?
Tom Sofer is like late 19th.
Yeah, late 19th century.
So I'm curious, right? This idea of like um also like Rambam, right? These are statements that are being made way before 1948 in
Yeah,
a purely hypothetical situation.
yeah.
How much weight do they hold in the halachic process? I'm so curious to ask Rav Goren that question, right? Like
The Rambam holds a lot of weight. That's for sure.
for sure,
Yeah.
Rambam holds a lot of weight, and yet like it's not really like the I don't think Rambam is thinking when we get a Jewish state, this is what we're going to do,
It's unclear, meaning the Rambam wrote, right, in his Mishnah Torah, Hilchos Melachim Milchamot, right? The
right?
laws of kings and their wars. Meaning he did think that
Yep.
there is real
The last
application of
part.
this stuff. Right? So the one of the knocks against Rav Goren is even if you do believe that that there should be some intrinsic authentic articulation of these ways of getting to a Jewishly run army by looking exclusively in the Jewish sources. If you're picking out, a little, I don't want to say a throwaway, but a
Yeah,
pirush of some, of the Sforno on Parsha Vayikra, and you're pulling something from the Kuzari, and you're pulling these sort of um, sources that might talk to your topic but weren't treated with the same gravitas or the same way as other major halachic sources over the years. So that's a really interesting question.
right.
Can you rely on these non-authoritative, non-halachic sources to develop some of this stuff? That's part of the interesting question.
I have
Um,
so many questions. Can I
yeah,
ask one more quickly though?
one more.
Um, I forgot it because I got so excited.
Many non-religious Jews
Hmm.
don't know much about Chumash, but they will pick out things like this to be occupied with about the so-called faults of the Jewish nation.
Yeah, yes, that's true, right? Meaning our critics certainly nitpick, there's no shortage of sources that you can point to if you want to be critical and you want to find faults. There's plenty. Um, you know, the question to the critics and to the haters is, well, what do you do with all the really positive sources and how can you ignore those?
I
Um,
just wanted to
but
mention that Joshua's study in Eretz Israel was at a Chesder yeshiva
mhm,
in the region where Moshe Rabbeinu is buried, and right across from that. And the one of the heads of it was a rabbi who studied here at Nair, but was from Canada, who is a specialist in establishing the text of the Rambam.
mhm,
So he was often asked to paskin, evidently. I found out over these years now, early on when it came to some of these kinds of questions, because they were working very hard to establish an actual, good critical text of the Rambam, so there wouldn't be any question about what the text itself said, because
right.
with him as well as with Rashi and others, when it comes to these matters, you really got to know what it is. I don't know what he wrote about war. I think that would be a good thing to go to find out, actually.
Yeah.
That's
So there's a
there
similar
was,
issue
that they
arose
could
with
use to
the
help them.
Meiri. So the Meiri
Mhm.
is a Rishon. The Meiri lived in the 13th century, I think. And he was known as a tremendous, right, one of the Gedolim of his time. But his writings
Mhm.
were lost. Were only rediscovered, I think, in the Cairo Geniza. But were only discovered,
Mhm.
maybe not
Mhm.
the, I'm not
That's
sure
right.
but were only
I think it
rediscovered.
was.
Were only discovered relatively recently. And so the question is, even though the Meiri is a known Rishon of serious, serious heft, can we rely on the Meiri if he wasn't subject to the same scrutiny and criticism as the Ramban was over the years of people advocating yes for his position, no for his position? We just don't know. So
Mm.
it's a really fascinating question.
Another important theme you bring up is how to avoid future wars. And
Yeah,
one certainly, but has to think about that if we look at what happened between World War I and World War II.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
putting the other culture down, the other people down, so far down, just made them that much more angry to go out and prepare all the guns and ammunition they could possibly do as surreptitiously as they could. And in the case we have now, we have the problem of a curriculum in a school, right? Where these darlings are taught to hate us from the very first moment they can read.
yeah,
They learn their letters, their Arabic letters, with things like that. I mean, how do we prevent another war without saying, well, we got to do away with this, we got to do away with that, And in our own country, well, Robert knows how I feel about this. The NEA's withdrawn anything from the Anti-Defamation League's definition of
The NEA's
anti-Semitism and
board
the
of
Holocaust stuff.
directors ruled
So,
yesterday that they reject that motion that was adopted by certain parts of the organization. So the NEA's
wow.
leadership
Oh,
has
great. I didn't know
acted
that.
the way they thought was actually probably more politic and more true.
Oh,
So,
thank you for
yeah.
telling us that. Thank
I,
all
you.
I
right.
I've
rem
been
So
I
sitting
yes,
about it
remembered
for 2 weeks.
I
okay. Avi
remembered my
remembered his
question, so
question
I'm
before
gonna
he
put my
forgets.
foot. Yeah. So it's less of a question and more of just I think like a bigger view of, first of all, I see the issue of, is the issue of war a bein adam lamakom or a bein adam lachavero issue as like
Hmm.
a huge question that would need to be answered, right? Is this a dispute between human beings? Like in the case of the Midianites, we're talking about the women that are moving them towards Baal Peor. This sounds like a war, right? And the other terminology that I'll use is like a Mohammed mitzvah, that
Yeah,
is a
Mhm.
mitzvah ben Adam lamakom, which has its ethic, right? And then you'll have, let's say, a Mohammed reshut or aspects of ben Adam lechavero in a war as well that will also have the
yeah.
medical
So
ethic,
so in the
right?
in the halachic sources, there definitely is that distinction between Mohammed mitzvah and Mohammed reshut, obligatory war and a discretionary war or expansionist war, and they have different rules that are followed.
Okay,
Right.
cool. Because
So
as we're reading them, it seems like I just needed to remind myself that we are in the context of a divinely commanded war,
right.
which is, and just the way that kind of gets played out in modern Israel as to, right, where the Israeli Defense Forces, even though we often strike first, right? We're the ones that launched the attack on Iran. Um, and proactively, right? And so you have to have it's not exactly a defense, but it's a defense because if they did that into the future, we're defending.
Right.
And so
Right.
I
So
think
that
that
and
it's
that
just
that's part of,
like
the whole debate about whether it's appropriate or not appropriate to evoke Amalek in the current war situation.
right.
That plays into this as well. I mean, everyone agrees a defensive war, and no one can, I guess you
Well, at
could
what
argue
point,
about, right,
right? At
about
what point in
what
time
point
is
does
it
a
not
defensive war stop being
right?
defensive, but meaning no one would think what's going on in Gaza is not a defensive war. You know,
I could easily, I just want to share this with everyone and see if it makes any sense because I think I'm reading outside the box. But why is Moshe Katzaf Alehem, right? And he says the women are the ones that caused this whole thing. Is it possible that the mitzvah of the war in terms of Surat Mijanim was really that they were just supposed to kill the women and that they went out to battle and they followed the rules of society and they killed the men. And then Moshe's like, no, no, you told this isn't a regular war. This is a war to for our religion and for our God. and it's going to have different rules than a regular war.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what the
The
Chasam
men
Sofer is
put them
getting
up
at.
to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Interesting question.
And
We're gonna
Yeah.
stop. We're at 9 o'clock. We're after 9 o'clock, according to my computer clock. So
Yeah.
it's
It
it's
was a good
uh
one. It
it's
was a good one.
it's time to say good night. Hope we'll see everyone in shul. Robert, I know you guys are away for Shabbos. We hope to see everyone else in shul over Shabbos. We can read it inside and maybe gain some further insights and say together Chazak Chazak Benit Chazek, and I'll see everyone back on the Zoom next
yeah,
Tuesday.
we need that.
All right, Lila
Thank
Thank
Tov.
you.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
very loud. So thank you,
so
Rabbi.
much, Rabbi.